I just want to try to relate some material I've looked at in the past to do with embodied cognition, particularly Mark Johnson's work on on image schema and the kind of meaningfulness that it's generated by the body. Look at that idea together with some of the more recent stuff I've been thinking about to do with the idea of a sense of a continuous and persistent self being generated by stable and persistent activation patterns emerging from ultimately the biochemistry of the body. In Mark Johnson's writing, he says this quotation, which I think I've used before, which is something along the lines that meaning and thought emerge from our capacity for let me get this right, emerge from our capacity for perception, object manipulation and bodily movement. So basically all of the complex epistemological structures, the abstract thinking that we're kind of so proud of really, and that kind of marks us out as human, all of that complex structure of knowledge and meanings that we have as either consciously available or not, in Johnson's terms, come out of the highly structured and organized experiences that our body provides for us in a completely physical sense. So, and it tends to happen through things like conceptual metaphor, which features very strongly in his writing and in the writings of other people like George Lakoff. So, for example, our capacity to conceive certain kinds of knowledge as objective relies upon our embodied experience with those things we call objects. Objective knowledge is considered to be outside of ourselves, it's considered to be interpersonally available, it's considered to be stable, relatively well bounded. It has a number of those kinds of features. In the same way that objects, at least objects which are visualizable and visible, that's the key aspect of that, I think. Visible objects are similarly external to the body, detached in the way that objectivity is supposed to be detached, separate, interpersonally available. We can all stand around and look at the same object, reasonably well bounded, has a certain kind of spatial and temporal existence and so on. So that's one of the kind of examples I'm thinking of in relation to Mark Johnson and other people's quotations in relation to that idea that meaning and thought emerge from those capacities, or emerge in that capacity, because it's the kind of space that we're talking about, that knowledge and meaning exists within, kind of space of reasoning. And that's, I think, what he's talking about when he says the word capacity. So what's the relationship between that and the stuff I've been thinking about most recently, coming out of Antonio Damasio's specifically, but also referred to in Damasio's writing, and in Sean Gallagher to a certain extent, and other people, to do with this idea of a continuous and present self, what we might think of as an ongoing identity, and the idea that it might emerge from very specific bodily responses, particularly, as I say, the biochemical, let's say, information that is being sent to the brain by certain maintenance routines of the body and monitoring systems within the body. Well, I think one of the things what's happening there, I suspect, is that actually, I've completely lost what I'm talking about there. What does that mean? So I'm trying to avoid using words like centre in this, unless I'm really sure that I mean centre. I mean, there seems to be a way that we configure ourselves as subject, and it's that configuring of subject that's really being alluded to with this understanding of this activation pattern sent by the body, which is stable and persistent over time. I suppose what I'm kind of suggesting there is that in the same way that abstract knowledge forms, like a piece of objective knowledge, is metaphorically understood as a physical object, sort of. So this persistent and stable pattern is also kind of understood as a stable object. Is that right? But it's a stable object which we are kind of infinitely close to, and I think that's a phrase that Metzinger uses in Being No One. The sense that it's an object that we are infinitely close to the extent that we are identified with it as the subject of that. It is. We feel it to be ourselves. We feel ownership of it and ownership by it, I guess. But it's an object which is. I have to use the word centre, which is centrally located within that panoply of objects and experiences that is constantly in an exchange around us. I think it feels a bit like, as I'm talking about it, it feels like that book by Borges, the short story by Borges in Labyrinth called The Library of Babel. It's a fantastic book, and most aspects of that particular short story aren't relevant to what I'm talking about right now. But one of the things that I think is relevant is that a brief synopsis of the story is that it's this fantastic library, an infinite library, which contains all possible books written in all possible languages with all possible combinations of characters. And of course, in a library like that, almost all of the books are meaningless or untranslatable, and this library is staffed by librarians who basically wander the halls of this infinite library trying to find books that have got any kind of trace of reliable meaning within them. But there's a myth within this library, or Borges suggests there's a myth within this library in that even though it appears infinite, and even though one can keep walking forever until one dies, the myth is that somewhere in the library is this central room. So it's a kind of weird Pascal type centre to this library, and in this central room there's a huge circular book, and the circular book is both central, kind of infinite, but also kind of derivative of meaning. It's kind of logos center. It's the source of. It's the mythical source of all the knowledge which sort of exists in these partial books outside of it. So I don't know why that reminds me of what I'm talking about. I guess I'm struggling trying to find language to. I was going to say language to close my thoughts with, really, but I guess I'm trying to find thoughts, really, and all that comes up are sections from books. But there seems to be some kind of relationship between that sort of general idea to do with the kind of sea of knowledge and meaning that we create for ourselves, and it seems to be derived from that, as I say, Johnson's idea that it derives from our capacities for bodily manipulation, object manipulation, bodily movement and perception. There seems to be a relation between that and this kind of organizing principle which we think of as central, this activation pattern which is stable, which is a kind of carrier frequency, which is the still center of the revolving library or something. I'll have to think some more about that. I just can't quite get the image in my mind, really.